Hi all, welcome to episode 22 of our Walk in My Shoes series for professional advisors. My name is Sophia Sahanik and I'm the Director of Membership and Development here at Philanthropy Impact. This series is designed to support professional advisors to ultra and high net worth individuals in developing your knowledge around philanthropy, social investment and impact investing. If you'd like to know more about how to become a member or about our training program, please get in touch and I'll be available in the chat. A couple of house rules for today. We ask that you remain respectful to the panel, the discussion and each other. And as this is a strictly 30-minute session, we are limiting questions and interaction to the chat only. Please post questions there and we'll do our best to get to them. This episode, we're coming together to hear from next-gen philanthropists and social impact investors to discuss their role in the COVID-19 recovery phase and what they want from their professional advisors. Chairing today's discussion, we have Rennie Hoare, Partner and Head of Philanthropy at Hoare Co. And joining him, we have Lizzie Steinhart, Philanthropy Advisor at LCM Family, Kristina Johansson, who's the Managing Director at the Family Foundation Solberga Foundation, and Sid Efromovich, who is co-founder and pledge at the Generation Pledge. Thank you for joining. I will now hand over to Rennie to make a start.
Great stuff, Sophia, and thank you for the Apple-assisted introduction. I think we've got a great panel here today, and really exciting to see the discussion that leads from it. If you do have questions that come up over the course of this half an hour, do put them into the chat function. I'll be looking at that, and we'll be able to engage the panelists and draw that in when it makes sense. So, Sid, I'd like to kick off with you, please, and ask the not insubstantial question: why do the next generation matter?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity of being on this panel. So if we're going to slice any demographic in the world, right? Like if you take any demographic that you want, there is one demographic that is the most predictably powerful in the future by a long stretch. Right, like the demographic that is expected to have the most amount of power in the future consistently is always next generation. But here's a really weird thing about it. If you think about next generation and the fact that they're going to inherit all this amount of power, or that they're even so powerful today, in many ways, they're a very neglected population in terms of how to train about how to be really impactful, how to think about impact in a holistic way, looking about through the entire portfolio, like how you can use your access, your personal resources, your careers. And so it's this demographic that if we're really interested in building a better future, it becomes really important to focus on them, given how neglected it is and how it has this outsized advantage for the future.
I think that point of neglect is a fascinating one, but Lizzie, are you finding though that maybe this is forcing people to be more proactive in going to advisors and structuring their donor journeys? Is this a trend that you're seeing?
I think really going along with what Sid's saying, I'm finding that actually this generation aren't tackling and coming to their advisors because they've got so many points of information in their lives. They're having thousands of interactions every day through social media and through their business networks, that they're seeing the sort of traditional advisors as not being people that they may necessarily want to take advice from at this time. So it's really up to us to jump in and lead those conversations to make sure that we're getting to know our current clients' children. And I don't mean my children, people who are 10, 12, 15. A lot of our clients protect their children until they're ready to inherit the wealth. And that's really that's a terrible thing because then they're not prepared for when the wealth arrives. So beginning that donor journey early, both in terms of family businesses and the philanthropy journey, is absolutely critical at this stage with the wealth transfer on its way and all of the opportunities that are out there. Because apart from anything else, being very commercial about it as advisors, we will lose our clients and the money that they have and hold with us, because then the next generation haven't had that time to engage with us. So I think now is a time, there are so many opportunities, and philanthropy and impact investing is growing in popularity. People are taking decisions every day around ESG, and people are working and owning businesses that are absolutely driven by values. And we need to get on top of that and be alongside those journeys, and really advising less about wealth and advising more about values and connectivity.
And that seems like it's going to be stretching advisors into different directions. It's possibly a new set of skills, a new framework that will need to be developed to do this with integrity. I think integrity and authenticity are absolutely essential, and possibly it's using different skills. Kristina, it'd be fascinating to hear from what has been your experience to date with advisors, and have they got up to speed sufficiently quickly to take on and match up with where you need them to be in terms of the advice they give?
Yeah, so my sisters and I got together 3 years ago with the kind of ever-growing threat of the climate crisis and the rise in authoritarianism and global austerity, and we felt that as next-gen inheritors, sitting idly by and perpetuating this wealth inequality just wasn't compatible with a living planet. And so we were looking for support from advisors to figure out what can we do to align our values with our overall portfolio. And we started our philanthropic foundation about 2-ish years ago, supporting climate justice organizations. And my experience with professional advisors on this has not really been that great. I think a real understanding and commitment to social justice, like across the board in the sector, in the private wealth sector, is wholly missing, and in particular, an intersectional understanding of social change. There's definitely been a lot of great progress, and I mean, I'm new in this space in the last few years, and I've seen how ESG, gender lens investing, impact investing has increasingly become something that advisors aren't starting to talk about, but I still feel like there's a long way to go, and I'm not sure how it doesn't go as deep. There hasn't been the work that's been needed to do, like the commitment to really understanding social justice and how wealth, like traditional wealth management, has intersected with social justice. And there's like such an incredible amount of power within these institutions and networks, and it feels that there's the social impact work and the connection between social impact and social justice is still in its infancy. And in all honesty, in the last few years, I have seen some examples that feel like disingenuous and inauthentic. And you know, we're really running out of time. The planet is like quite literally on fire, and business as usual hasn't gotten us to where we are today, and and it's just a profoundly destabilized future. And we really need to leverage. Me and my family felt like we have to leverage the like privilege and the wealth that we have to align ourselves with on our social justice journey. And I think there's a real need for from clients, and I have peers who have expressed the same like need from private wealth advisors to really devise authentic action instead of performative actions, and to have a holistic approach to the wealth and across the board, from philanthropy to investments, to like what Sid said, to all of our access. I think that it's not a simple like answer. I think it's like a deep piece of work that the whole sector has to grapple with. It's a messy space. There's not one solution for the like multiple crises that we're living under. And I think that it's important for advisors to go into that messiness and take on this huge challenge and challenging norms like in like growth and GDP and what constitutes a return, because so much of what we've understood that to mean has really radically needs to radically shift in this moment.
Which I think completely helps to capture that spirit that things have shifted a long way. And I suppose for advisors, it becomes, is it going to be fast evolving incumbents that manage to match up to this new and emerging demand, or is it going to be new players inside the wealth management sector, inside the professional advisor community, that are the only ones that can react sufficiently swiftly? This year would be fantastic to hear your take on, does it necessitate a completely new way of operating, or do you think incumbents can react?
I think it depends what kind of advisor you're talking about. I think there are a few philanthropy advisors, I'd like to count myself amongst them, and you as well, Renee, who really understand the not-for-profit sector, both in this country and internationally. And what I'm looking for with work with clients is understanding their theory of change, because I appreciate that philanthropy is not a hobby anymore. It's not a pastime. It's not an indulgence. It's the next generation believe, a lot of research is showing, they believe they can make a difference, and they can make a difference, and they don't want that money to be frittered away on whimsical projects that somebody tells them to go and invest in. And I think to be a good advisor, it's to have a very broad understanding of the not-for-profit sector, how it operates, how governments operate, and where money can create the most value. And that's about creating long-term conversations. We no longer, I think, as advisors, have a role of being purely transactional. It's not just about setting up a foundation, putting a contract in place, looking after somebody's investments, returning profit. It's about that hand-holding, getting to know the whole family, understanding the family's trajectory, what their history is, where they've come from, and what their DNA is. And that, when you look at family businesses, often it's that DNA that drives forward successful businesses. And that, I hate the sort of shirt sleeves analogy, but that which is a very negative connotation, that money's lost within 3 generations. I think the people we're looking at now as the second and third generation, they're digitally connected in a way that their parents and their grandparents weren't, and that's the future. And we need to mentor them, we need to support them and believe in them to be innovative in terms of where the money's invested, how the business is taken forward, and that, I think the line between investments and philanthropy is getting increasingly blurred. And I hope if we were all sitting here in 10 years' time, the language would have changed, because it doesn't make any sense anymore to be making money on one hand and putting our profits from the income that we created into philanthropy. It has to be across the board. And I think millennials, the younger generation, understand that entirely. That's what they've been brought up with, and that's the businesses that they're part of and will be driving forward. And I think the advice that we give as in this philanthropy space has to take account of all of that and listen to Kristina's sister and engage at that level that can be truly meaningful. So it's moving away from the transaction and moving to be the critical friend who can guide and introduce and mentor those people with wealth who want to do this in a meaningful way.
I think that's a critical point, and your shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. When we look at us as a bank, it was the 7th generation that almost made us go broke. So there's probably other warning factors later on down the line, but that bit of the financial supply chain, and not just looking at your grant making, looking at your investing, and actually looking at the way that your core business is operating, and are you maximizing good all the way across those components, certainly seems to be a rising desire within millennials, and certainly those involved with family businesses or big investment pots. Sid, one thing that certainly struck me from your opening remarks was bringing in different bits of power, advocacy, and privilege, and the influence over people, and the stuff that maybe advisors wouldn't be considering in the standard toolkit of what you can bring to bear to solve a problem. That sounds like a fascinating thing to explore. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the not just financial resources that people are now marshalling?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Renee. And I think that these are, like, it's a really interesting point about, like, what does advice look like, right? Because here's a really weird thing about being a next gen. So if you ask someone what they expect the experience to be like as the next generation, they expect it to be this thing where you're going to inherit, or you already live with like so much access, so much privilege, all these comforts that people can only dream of. Yet, if you ask them, do you expect inheritors to live in a world that they'd be proud to live in the world that they're happy to be a part of? Very few people will say, yeah, that's exactly what I expect. In 50 years, I expect inheritors to be, oh yeah, in a world that is like, is green, it's working, where there's equity, where there's racial, gender, social equity. And the thing is that the gap between where we are to where we want to be is enormous. And to think, and it requires shifting how we think about our resources. It requires shifting how we treat some of the vehicles that have traditionally been used in a way that is inadequate. So for example, when talking about philanthropy, I find it very irking that people still keep on referring to philanthropy as passion. It's not enough. We need to talk about things that are values oriented. In the same way that we can't look at business, we can't look at the fact that our families have incredible access and treat them as something that just needs to be perpetuated, maintained. That's the DNA of the family, and that's what we keep. We need to make sure that those things actually connect with our values and that we're showing up in the way that actually creates that world that we would like to inherit, right? And so when it comes to these all other forms of power, other forms of capital, other forms of influence, inheritors and ultra high net wealth families, especially multi-generational ultra high net wealth families, have an extraordinary amount of social, political, cultural capital that can't be neglected and that can be used for good. We've seen what happens when that's used for ill. We've seen some of the horrible effects of what happens when you have strong lobbying powers and whatnot that actually disrupt society and don't move us in the direction we would like to go in. But it becomes really interesting to think of what's possible when we take bold action, but also what's possible when we do that in collaboration, right? Part of the issue as well is that so much of the sector is siloed. So one of the reasons we created Generation Pledge was because our experience as inheritors was one that was very siloed. It was looking for information as an island, as opposed to seeing how we can work as a collective and share resources, learn from experts in the field, but also go into uncharted territory. We've never been able to design the kind of world we'd like to live in, ever, right? And so what does that actually look like? And it involves asking these really tricky questions and going into spaces that are actually quite messy. We have a lot more questions than we do answers, but it shouldn't preclude us from taking action, even though it's messy.
Do you feel it sounds like that building of the trusted networks is a really important bit, and from what I'm seeing, you're talking about drawing in different bits of expertise from beyond just the standard client to advisor relationship. You're talking about things which are broader. Kristina, there's a question that's come up through the chat about looking at platforms, drawing in other areas of advice. And so it'd be interesting to know, firstly, do you see these things as tools that you want to be harnessing? And possibly the other bit to understand is, what are the things that you and your sister are setting out to achieve? Because that, by what you're setting out to achieve, the tools that you use will obviously go hand in hand with that.
Yeah, I think that like the networks that that are being described are super critical. The peer-to-peer learning networks and the collaboration that's critical for the problems that we're working on solving is deeply needed. I've also noticed that like a place that like I think the philanthropy and social impact has kind of identified as needs to be more centered is actually listening to people with lived experience and people on the front lines and communities who are most impacted by the issues that we're working on, because I think there's such a disconnect. It's almost like two different worlds that are happening with the private wealth sector and philanthropy. And if we're not talking to those who are most impacted by the issues that we're working on, I think that becomes really it's a losing situation, and we have so much to gain from working together and working collaboration. And if I think it's, for me, I found that they're often not being invited into spaces, they're not being listened to, and like looked at as experts. And I think that's like one of the areas where I've learned the most from. I've learned definitely a lot from my peers. I think that bringing in more folks who are really on the ground and who have solutions to these huge problems can be centered and like can teach us about how to approach some of these issues. And then in terms of our what we're trying to achieve, I mean, when I entered philanthropy a few years ago, I really didn't know anything about it, and was so grateful for communities like Resource Generation that looked at social justice philanthropy and what does it really mean to shift power within philanthropy and address, like I mentioned, address the root causes of some of these injustices. Because a lot of philanthropy traditionally, and I think one of the reasons why maybe young generations haven't been so excited about it, is it's been quite band-aid oriented, and it hasn't, there's been a lot of weird ways that philanthropy has operated in the past where, you get your name on things. And I think our generation is kind of uncomfortable with most of that, where we're not as self-congratulatory. We can notice the systems that were in place that allowed certain people to accumulate wealth. And now there needs to be like reparative work done to undo some of that damage and to address the problems that exist in society. I think that I think that next generation is interested in that, is interested in having that honest and hard conversation and grappling with the kind of contradictions of philanthropy, because I think that's the only way we're going to address the root causes and not just the symptoms. And by really thinking about the power that exists within philanthropy, who's making decisions on boards. You had another conversation a couple of days ago on racial equity weeks ago, and it was mentioned that there was some research done on foundation boards, charitable boards in the UK, and 99% of board members are white. And so when we only have people who would have lived experience, who don't have the lived experience of those most impacted by injustice making the decisions, we're just going to be perpetuating, or so we're not going to be addressing the root cause. And so I think like one of the things I'm hoping to gain from working in philanthropy is really challenging some of the top-down approaches that aren't working, and like trusting and looking to frontline and most impacted communities as decision makers and leaders. And I think that's a growing trend that I'm excited and hoping that I think a lot of young people are interested in, and hopefully that advisors will learn about this approach and learn about what it looks like to listen to people who are working on social justice in the front lines.
Which I think for advisors, not coming at things having the perfect answer can be quite frightening. And so I think going into these discussions with humility and bravery sounds like it's your advice. And there's also probably the other component at which across the board in philanthropy, the discussion of failures is pretty hard and doesn't happen sufficiently frequently. And to be able to learn properly, it sounds like that also has to be built into people's toolkit. Lizzie, I see there's a question that's come through about the embracing of metrics, and how on one hand people are going on a charge saying that metrics are absolutely essential, and on the other hand seemingly ignoring them and not calibrating around them. Do you have a way of either showing why there's that disconnect, or is there an approach that you would suggest that maybe overcomes those issues?
The way that we work is so personal, so sort of individualized, that whilst we take account of metrics and the research and the background, what I'm looking to do is always just to get to know my clients, if it's a group, as deeply as possible, and listen, and then make sure that if they don't know already, which many of them don't in detail, is making sure that I'm helping them learn. So I'm not mentoring them, but I'm introducing them to the right people. So ideally, I'm doing myself out of a job as a philanthropy advisor, that they should be the experts in the cause that they want to, the cause that they do care about, but want to know more about and engage with deeply. Because going back to the basics of philanthropy that I'm sure everybody on this call is aware of, the difference between philanthropy and charity is it also involves the non-financial support. And that's the advocacy, the networking, the huge potential in innovation and brains that are out there that can engage and support charities who, by God, need support at the moment. So it's nurturing. I like to nurture relationships between my clients and the causes that they care about. They then make the decisions based on the metrics, based on the research. And a lot of philanthropy is about gut feeling. And that's the same when it comes, whichever bit of philanthropy you look at, whether that's, the 100% grant or impact investment, we all have a bit of gut feeling about it. So my role I see as a facilitator, and I'm not talking about the non-financial stuff, just to be clear. I'm not talking about buying a place on a board. That it's the old school way of wielding power. And as you were sort of talking about Kristina a bit, I think millennials are deeply uncomfortable about having a name over the door or seeing as being highly influential and driving conversations, but they want to be part of it and they have a lot to say and a lot to bring. So what I like to do is be the facilitator, and I know the sector well enough to know who my clients should be talking to go on. And that's obviously the metrics are behind that, but I have to allow I can do the due diligence on behalf of clients, but they have to go in feet first themselves.
So it sounds like co-creation rather than top-down authoritarian approaches are better, and maybe this is a way of addressing that metrics problem. If you're listening and you're a true partner with a charity, then you're probably coming at it with something that's a lot more meaningful and useful for both sides. I think we're very much coming up to time, and so I see John jumping onto screen to give the rounding up question. So I'll hand over to you, John.
Okay. Renee, thank you very much. Lizzie, Sue, Kristina, that was brilliant. Thank you. It's really neat to see not the 60s being repeated, but the essence and values of the 60s coming forward with you. And this feels really, as we say in Canada, neat. Okay, so final words of wisdom from each one of you, 30 seconds. Lizzie, do you want to start, please?
I think, I'm addressing this mainly to other advisors, is be brave, get personal, get to know your clients. And if you haven't met the next generation of your clients, then it's your job to ask to meet them. So, I think that's something that we sit back and wait for that to happen to be driven forward. We need to be more proactive in these conversations.
Thank you. And I want to reinforce that. It's really important to be able to talk to your clients about their values and motivations and stuff. So, Kristina.
Yeah, don't be afraid to get into the messiness of this and make a commitment to social justice across all aspects of this work. It's not just the philanthropy piece, it needs to be the entire wealth advisory space, actually across all sectors, to really go deep and commit to social justice. And my last, one thing I've really learned is to listen to those most impacted by injustice and to trust them.
Thank you, Kristina. Sid.
Yeah, don't feel like you need to go alone in this journey. Whether you're an advisor or someone who's looking for advice or someone who's doing the work is really hard. It's never been done before, and we need to do it. We need to be the generation that does it. Know that you're not alone. Know that there's a lot of people working on this too, and that we're ready to work in partnership and to help build that. And also that we don't need to reinvent wheels because we're at the point where we're building wings and we need to do that together.
Thank you. Renee, last word, and then Sophia.
Well, I think if I was speaking to advisors, the exciting thing is that people absolutely want advice. And it's come to time where it can be really, really helpful and can facilitate amazing things. So to professional advisors, it's more about learning the language, embracing it with humility and trying to co-create something. And I think actually it creates a very, very exciting possibility of a new type of relationship.
Terrific. It's really nice to see how transformative this can be. Sophia, thank you very much. Sophia.
Thanks, John. Thank you all. That was really interesting, and without doubt, one of many discussions around this area that we'll be having. We'll be recording posting the recording on the LinkedIn group, or you can get in touch with me directly. The information is in the chat right now. Next week, we'll be exploring the effects of both Brexit and COVID-19 on philanthropy and social investment, and exploring what professional advisors need to do to prepare for their clients for this. But that's us done for today. Thank you, everybody.